people in Missoula already know, which is that levels of particulate far below what we try to regulate here and what the EPA standards attempt to regulate are very damaging to people, and they're most damaging to those who are most sensitive to them, meaning the older folks in the valley here and the young children, asthmatics, people who are at risk already for having cardiovascular and pulmonary function, which is not exactly as good as the average healthy human being. And we're being asked essentially by Stone to just kind of forget about those people in the name of profit, and I don't believe in that. We're also in collusion with them, being asked to do that by the state board as far as I'm concerned. And that I find truly appalling. I hope that people don't swallow these arguments that that these new rules are so wonderful, because they are inevitably 20 years behind the times as far as what we know about the damage which is caused by particulate and other sorts of toxins in the air. I would like to work with Stone. I think most people in Missoula would be more than happy to feel that Stone was a good neighbor. I think Stone needs to demonstrate that it's a neighbor worth having. Thank you.
Bruce? Bruce, you said you were a member of the Air Quality Board. Was that Missoula City County, or was that the Citizens?
I was on the Citizens Advisory Council.
And you said you had done some graduate work. Was that in the environmental field?
No, it was in psychology.
Thank you. Sean Farrell?
Kind of tired of not seeing anybody in any places. I've grown up in this town, and in the fourth grade I was tested for lung capacity. The children in my classes oh, that's why. Okay, I'll turn this way then. As you can tell, I've got he's got chronic sinusitis right now. I have sinus infections 6 to 8 times a year. I have a rotten egg smell that lingers in my house at certain points in time of the year. They correlate. I find that the collusion that I've been hearing about here, I was not aware of that. That pisses me off a lot. And I don't think that it's going to get away with it. I think that this man here has some evidence that's going to work to tame that. And I think you're going to have to rethink this. And you're going to have to start working with us. Okay? Thanks. I live at 2018 South 9th West. And I'm a Missoulian.
Carol Hovland?
My name is Carol Hovland. I lived at 400 Rollins, as here in Missoula. I'm outraged with what I perceive as a collusive relationship between the State Board of Health and Stone Container, and thereby not only endangering the air quality of Missoula, but also the land and water. Newton's law states, what goes up must come down, and this is why I suggest the impact will be much larger. In time, the effects of Stone's pollution will be seen in the deteriorating health of Missoulians. Our local grown food will be contaminated, as well as the water we drink. We can expect livestock to be poisoned by the grasses they consume. Acid rain is not that far-fetched also. All you have to do is read the obituaries to see the increase in cancer deaths in the last 20 years. And I believe that the majority of these deaths can be directly attributed to the increased pollution in this valley. We all must live by a series of rules and laws, and to exempt or expand the scope of any rule or law for the express use of a certain segment of our population, including big business such as Stone Container, makes those laws a joke. If Stone Container can further pollute this valley, we might as well forget about all the activities that we do as a private citizen to reduce or eliminate pollution. I'm speaking of recycling, air pollution devices on our automobile, adhering to air alerts in this valley as a few. Stone Container must be held accountable for the pollution that is brewing from their stacks today and in the future. To allow this company more latitude to pollute this valley is unforgivable and I feel criminal. Stone Container must upgrade its smokestack controls on the linear board plant now. It must also upgrade its other boilers to the absolute limits of technology in reducing pollution. Either Stone Container pays now, or the taxpayers will be paying billions later to clean up the mess left by Stone Container in the future. One only has to look to Milltown to see the results of unabated pollution. And finally, if the board enacts what it says it will, the governor might as well change his public service message to come and see what effect pollution has done to the scenic, historic, pristine nature of Montana. Thank you.
Dean Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dean Henderson. I live at Swan Lake, Montana. I own a small business here in Missoula, Montana, and spent a lot of time here in town. Used to live here. Got my master's degree in environmental studies from the University of Montana in 1991. Everything's pretty much been covered tonight. I really appreciate you're coming here to Missoula. I echo the concerns of others as to where the Board of Health is tonight, but it's pretty apparent that they really weren't looking too forward to coming to Missoula. They enjoy the control that they have over industry through Helena, where big business can more easily regulate the flow of PAC money, which keeps these people in their positions of power and in the position of basically of being corporate welfare babies. We've heard a lot of whining from Stone Container. We wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for the fact that Stone Container had come up with this solution, this proposed compromise. W.G. Stewart said they wanted to focus just on the number 4 boiler. They didn't want to compromise. Well, that's just not true. They created this compromise, and now they're handing it to us, and we're supposed to just sign it. That's not the way democracy works. So the whole rulemaking process is basically followed, and this whole hearing, the taxpayers could save a lot of money if we were not, at this very moment, catering to Stone Container. For example, I have an old car and my muffler falls off. The police officer comes up to me and says, hey, you got a problem. Would I have 23 years to negotiate a new muffler on my car with a police officer? When I testified in Helena, I testified there earlier on this issue, and I witnessed this Board of Health pass the wood stove ban in Missoula, and in the very next proceeding that it addressed, let Stone Container double its opacity standards. So what does that tell you? Can I go to the Board of Health here in Missoula now and say, I want a bigger wood stove, I want to burn tires? Can we negotiate that for 23 years? I mean, there's an obvious bias here towards big business, and what we're seeing in this nation is an increasing bias. Nationally, we're stripping down laws to help out the big oil companies. You want to scrap the Department of Energy now. Why do you think the Department of Energy is the first one to go? Because the oil companies want it that way. Then they can regulate themselves. Why do you think Montana Power just went to the Public Service Commission in Helena and said we want to appoint the members of the Public Service Commission? That's because Montana Power, which is a descendant of the Anaconda Company, wants to regulate themselves. Why do you think Stone Container came to the Board of Health with a compromise solution that had no public input from Missoula County, no public input from public officials of Missoula County, who, by the way, I would like to commend for being here tonight and for voicing their concerns in a true spirit of democracy, unlike the board members who are absent tonight. But why do you think this is the case? Why do you think it's the case that ARCO, another descendant of the Anaconda Company, is now being basically given carte blanche on cleanup at the Superfund site through these new water bills that are pending before the governor right now? It's a gift to ARCO. It's all a gift to big business. I mean, let's get serious. Let's get real. Stone Container is a $4.1 billion corporation. That's just the U.S. operations of this multinational corporation. God knows how much money they're sending off into the Eurodollar markets in Europe that just gets lost in the form of capital flight. God knows how many workers have died in their operations in Brazil, where a boiler is blown up, in Honduras, where apparently there was actually some people killed on one of their plantations in Honduras. The company is 10% owned by AXA et al., which is a French corporation. It's an insurance conglomerate which also has many interests in the financial sector. It's related to the Equitable Life Assurance Society, which is very interesting since the Equitable Life Insurance Society is a closely Morgan-held entity that also had very much to do with the Burlington Northern Empire being set up in the state. The Stone family runs Stone Container. They own another 9% of the corporation. There's 6 Stone family members on the board. Roger Stone is the chairman and CEO of the board. They make their home in the Chicago area, and they make a killing. Roger Stone made $1.6 million last year, not counting his stock holdings. Stone Container is complaining about spending $5 million on a new technology that can bring them into compliance with a state law that's 23 years old. They're lucky we're not going to go after them retroactively and fine them $25,000 a day. They're lucky we're even before this board tonight in an attempt to have to fend them off. Why are we even in this situation? Well, it's money. I propose that each of the 6 Stone brothers takes about a half cut of salary for the year, and that pays for the technology they need to resoup this mill, and we'll be just fine. But I'd also like to point out that Stone owes OSHA $104,000 that it has refused to pay. Who's going to collect that bill? Here we are talking about new standards, new regulations. Well, the old ones don't even get enforced, so what's the use? What is the use? What's the point? I mean, let's enforce what's on the books already. We're looking at the most dangerous pulp and paper mill in the world to the west. In the world, statistically speaking. By far, Stone Container's most dangerous mill in its entire operations. By far the most dangerous pulp and paper mill in the world. Now that's just from the side of the workers who work at that mill, who we want to help to get better working conditions too. At the same time that we work to clean up the environment. These two things are not incompatible, as big business often says they are. I'm sure most of the workers out there would love to have a safer work environment at the same time we clean up the air and the water coming out of that mill. So in closing, I just like to say that we just have to put things in perspective, and it's time that since the state government and the federal government right now seem to be back in bed with big business, we go through these trends. We've never really got out of them. We've had a steady concentration of power in the United States economy since 1870. It's steady. You look at the curve, it's steady. So we've never really got out of it. There's been periods where we've at least fought off these people, at least stood up for ourselves, at least tried to make democracy work. Well, the Missoula County officials have stood up at a local level. This is what the Republicans are harping on. Let's get things back to a local level. And here we got guys like Remington Court and Rib Gustafson and Jeremy Thane on the Board of Health, some of whom I understand have now resigned. It's a good thing. Saying that we should, leave this in the hands of the state? All of a sudden, they're doing a 180 on their argument? I don't understand. If we want more local control, here's a chance. Here's a big chance for the state of Montana to turn back local control of Stone Container to the county. And obviously this is something that Stone Container does not want, and the best thing I could see happen was basically you need to trump this proposal, to bring it back to Missoula County, and to bring the Department of Health at the state level, not the Board of Health, which is an appointed body. It's different from the Department of Health. A lot of people don't know that. There's been lawsuits being threatened by this board's own Department of Health. That tells you what kind of corporate stoolies these people are. I would like to see the Department of Health at the state level to be able to come to Missoula County and to discuss this matter with local officials, and to create our own agenda. Maybe we want 10% opacity. Maybe 20% is not good enough. How do we know? Are we just going to follow Stone Container's line of questioning, which is what they've always done? They've always gotten out in front of the issue, framed the argument, strung it out. For 23 years they've been stringing this thing out. They've never had a permit that's valid. They've never had a permit that's valid. This thing is never been enforced. So I think we have to basically change our mindset. We have to begin to forge our own institutions, begin to forge our own agenda, and decide what we as citizens of this county want to do, and not to have some pre-calculated notion which was conjured up by Stone, taken to the State Department or the State Board of Health, and then delivered to us like we're some kind of little school children. We don't know what's good for us. So I think the process has to be changed, and I hope that that you will definitely thump this proposal. It's a bad proposal for Missoula County, and we could do a lot better here. So thank you.
Bernard Weisgerber.
My name is Bernard Weisgerber. I live at 18575 6 Mile Road in Huson. Probably, from what I've heard tonight, the closest to the mill. My wife and I own a small ranch on 6 Mile Road, and tonight I've listened to the Stone Container engineers, but I know what my eyes and my nose tell me, and I oppose any action. I oppose this action, and I oppose any action that would allow Stone Container to further pollute our breathing air. No increase in the opacity standards. Thank you.
Lauren Falcon. Not even close. Huh? Ma'am, could you spell your name?
It's Loreen Folsom, Loreen Folsom.
Thank you.
I'm a Missoula resident. My mailing address is Box 9225. I've lived 28 of the last 37 years in Missoula, and at age 52 am beginning to be one of those older citizens that Bruce Ammons spoke about. I have chronic sinusitis, which goes away when I leave town and returns when I come back. I know that my sore throat and congestion are due to the pollutants that Stone throws into the air, including such things as the phenols, the chlorine dioxide, methyl ethyl ketones, ethylene glycol, chlorine, sulfuric acid, and ammonia. I find it unconscionable that the State Health Board intends to allow Stone the latitude to pollute further. Citizens of Missoula in their solid waste burning devices are not allowed an opacity greater than 20%. Also, citizens are not allowed to burn any waste in their solid burning devices. I would suggest that perhaps Stone could do the same. Garen Smith, chemistry professor at the university specializing in environmental chemistry and also a member of the Missoula City County Health Board, spoke to us through an opinion editorial in today's Missoulian encouraging a good neighbor relationship with Stone. Besides that poor piece of advice, Garen also voted for the use of liquid de-icer on the streets of Missoula, which contains arsenic, which is one of the leading causes of lung cancer. That liquid deicer does not remain liquid, but of course dries to a powder, becomes part of our air shed, and we inhale it. Also, at the time Guerin advocated for continued use of MTBE, the EPA had listed it as a priority air pollutant. That's in Section 112 of the Clean Air Act. I would suggest that instead of presenting an apologetic posture in regard to Missoula citizens in the newspaper and also at the last health board hearing, and encouraging us all to be good neighbors to Stone, that Mr. Smith, an environmental chemist, be a good neighbor to us and warn us of the very hazardous situations we are being put in by the waste disposal and other processes that are going on west of town. For example, the considerable amount of PVC plastic being burned, Stone having a permit to burn 15 tons of plastic a day, about 900 to 1,000 pounds of that being PVC, according to the permit. Stone cries finances to the State Board of Health and gets away with it. As a school teacher, I received a $93 raise last year. I didn't tell the parents of my students that their children would receive a poorer education because I wasn't being paid enough money to give them a good one. Likewise, Stone should be required to give us the best quality air and water technologically possible, even if it does eat into their profits. Thanks. Also, I wanted to ask you, is there a public comment period allowed in writing after this hearing, or is this the end of the comment period?
This is the end of both periods. The written comments were to be received by today.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Snodgrass?
I think a very good and basic question has been raised regarding Stone Container Corporation. If they're able to reduce pollution, why are they asking for an increase in their pollution permit? Another question should be asked, and that is, can we trust Stone Container and or the state of Montana to self-monitor and enforce? History tells us very clearly no. The record is clear. The state has allowed the creation of a Superfund site here right before our eyes, and it is a Superfund site and a massive one. We should also ask ourselves about the qualifications of the State Board of Health. Mr. Gustafson falls asleep at the meetings. I have been there. He can't keep track of the issues. It's disgraceful. And there's been a demonstrated incompetence on the basis of ignorance of fact and inability to follow state guidelines. And I would cite specific examples for Mr. Hutchinson if he would so request. Is Stone Container a good neighbor? They are not. They are the midnight dumper. The senior citizens even talk about it. What comes out of the stacks at night and on weekends? Can we trust Stone? There have been reports of altered data given to us by former employees. I am particularly tired of naive and indifferent public officials who call Stone a good neighbor, especially officials such as Ms. Leahy, Mr. Carlson, Mr. Anderson, and others, who knew full and well about the massive dioxin contamination coming from Stone Container on the basis of the burning of chlorinated products. Chemistries emitted which cause endometriosis, in which the lining of the uterus begins to grow outside of the womb. Testicular non-descent among newborns, feminization of males, disastrous effects at the cellular level, breakage of DNA, resulting in loss of functionality in affected individuals and their offspring. These are transgenerational effects. Did our public health officials have the decency to inform us about the dioxin nightmare? No. But they knew about it. They hold the permit allowing Stone to burn plastic in their office. We should be asking ourselves some serious questions, not only about the state board, but the local officials. Stone Corporation is not a good neighbor. It has been poisoning its own workers and their spouses through contaminated clothing, contamination through physical contact, contamination during sexual intercourse through exchange of contaminated bodily fluids, and thus contamination of unborn babies during critical periods of fetal development, altering physical processes permanently, causing a plethora of tragic health effects. I'm talking about irreparable alteration of genetic material. The real costs to the state of Montana have not been measured in this permit. The costs that citizens are bearing in terms of health care, the costs which the state of Montana must absorb, are astronomically high. From the impacts to the brain, the nervous system, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, the immune system, the reproductive systems. Who will properly diagnose and assess impairment of cognitive functions, and flawed emotional development? Who will assess these tragic effects 20 or 30 years after the damage has been done and begins to manifest? Will the state enforce and protect? Can the state be trusted to enforce and protect? No. Look at the record. It reflects a dismal, and I would add, a criminal failure. The bottom line for some state oversight agencies and officials is profit and money. And the bottom line for some local officials is to keep their mouths shut so they can protect their jobs and their retirement plans. I believe that Stone Container cares more about its profits than about the health of Missoula residents, including, of course, Missoula's children. I believe that fact is demonstrably clear. Ask the women who cannot breathe downwind of Stone in the path of Stone's plume of chemical contamination. Ask the asthmatic children chemically injured by Stone, children forced to rely upon medications and nebulizers, machines, in order to simply breathe. Studies recently released by the state of Louisiana, which has the most horrific environmental nightmare ongoing in the United States, clearly demonstrate that clean industry is economical. It is economically feasible. It is economically advantageous. And I can make that information available to you in writing, Mr. Hutchinson. The Stone Container plant is an out-of-control, toxic monstrosity. Stone Container destroys the valley's living environment. Stone Container causes rampant, widespread chemical injury, robbing Missoula residents of their health and well-being and their futures. Stone Container kills. It has been killing for years. The poisoning, the chemical injury, and the killing are going to stop. If we have to remove board officials at the state level, and we're seeing motion there, we will do so, and we will continue to do so. To those officials who knew about the effects of Stone, who failed to warn until local residents brought the fight to the front door of those agencies, we would urge you to start looking for work elsewhere or begin to operate in a more forthright manner and earn your pay. Thank you.
Mr. Snodgrass, as the board has done in the past, I would ask if you have health studies that document those things that you talked about, that you would submit them for the record.
Yes.
Thank you. And also the Louisiana study on the economic feasibility. Thank you. Gary Henricks. Bill, you might have to move some.
I don't know if I'll be able to reach your microphone, so I'll try to speak louder.
You can use one of the...
Okay, it's working. I'd like to approach this. My name is Gary Henricks. I work in the city every day. I recreate in this area as well on weekends. And I'm a Missoula County resident. I live just outside of Lolo. I'd like to approach what the board is ruling on, the proposed agreement, and your role in this tonight from a little different perspective. Back in 1972, Montana's framers decided to enact a new constitution. And that's important for the purposes of what we're doing here tonight for a couple of reasons. One being that it wasn't a bunch of old fossils back in the late 1800s deciding that clean air and a clean environment was important. Only a little over 20 years ago, Montana's framers enacted a new constitution in 1972, and it was ratified by the people. And at that time, the framers, along with the people who ratified that constitution, found it so important that they included provisions for a clean and healthy environment within the Constitution itself. I would draw your attention to Article 2 of that Constitution, which is Declaration of Rights. And in that, Section 3 states that all persons are born free and have certain inalienable rights. They include the right to a clean and healthful environment and the rights of pursuing life's basic necessities, enjoying and defending their lives and liberties, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and seeking their safety, health, and happiness in all lawful ways. In enjoying these rights, all persons recognize corresponding responsibilities. Long ago, Chief Justice John Marshall of the United States Supreme Court granted corporations, which are artificial entities, a legal concept, the same rights in many areas of the law as persons do. Montana has seen fit to do that as well. Corporations have the protections of due process. They have the protection of recourse to the courts. It's important to note, I read Article 2, Section 3, that among that same listing of rights under the Montana Constitution, the 1972 version, are popular sovereignty, self-government, individual dignity, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, expression, and press, the right to know, the right to privacy, right to bear arms, the right against self-incrimination and double jeopardy, trial by jury. The framers of the 1972 Constitution felt that the environment and protection of a healthy and clean environment was as important as fundamental rights that are guaranteed in the U.S. as well as now the Montana Constitution. Under that, Article 9, Section 1, Environment and Natural Resources, reads, protection and environment. The state and each person shall maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment in Montana for present and future generations. Given that, this legal fiction, the corporation has the same standing as persons within due process and other things, it has attendant as well as obligations. And under Section 1 of Article 9, Protection and Improvement, the state, each person, including the corporations, and every individual in this room, has the duty and obligation to maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment in Montana. For purposes of our arguments here tonight, we have to look at the airshed factors in the Missoula Valley, which are quite unique. And under Article 9, Section 1, Stone Container not only has an obligation or duty under the Constitution, but has a moral duty as well to provide the people who share the Missoula airshed with the highest quality, cleanest air, and the best environment that it can produce. This is not a question of a simple $5 million expenditure on the part of a corporation. As noted by earlier speakers, and I would rely on the authenticity and accuracy of their statements, that this mill alone grossed $590 million in sales last year, and the U.S. holdings for Stone Corporation grossed $4.1 billion. This $5 million is not simply an expenditure, as well as Stone, like any other business under the United States tax code, can deduct these expenses. So what is at issue here is not the question of should Stone be allowed to further contaminate the airshed in the Missoula Valley with an increase in the particulate standard. Instead, the question is it needs to, under its obligation as a citizen and under the rights and responsibilities that are designated in the Montana Constitution, provide the cleanest possible air that it can. And that $5 million is deductible, and they argue that under the proposed agreement, they can finally have this monitored system for measuring the particulate emissions, and therefore they should, along with that, then get this increase in the particulate level. I would state that they're bound under the Montana law, Montana Constitution and Montana law, not only to expend that $5 million, which they would further be able to deduct, but that they do so and then monitor and be in compliance with the existing 20% particulate level, and that as good neighbors and as citizens, being the corporate entities and granted the rights they have in the legal processes, that they should do this. And I felt it important to come here tonight and note that at the most fundamental legal level, that being the United States and Montana constitutions, we're talking about the rights of each individual in here to have a clean and healthy environment, and the duties that go along with that under Section 9, or Article 9, Section 1, which are imposed upon each citizen in Stone, as well being a corporation and able to use the legal system and being imputed with the rights and obligations thereunder, has the obligation to do so as well. And I thank you for your time and attention to this matter, and I would encourage you to oppose the implementation of the proposed settlement and to go back with the 23-year-old standard, which is the 20% limit. Thank you very much.
Ellen Leahy.
For the record, I'm Ellen Leahy. I'm the health officer in Missoula County. I do appreciate the opportunity to comment on these rules in Missoula. I too, however, am disappointed that the State Health Board or some members of the State Health Board are not here. I've long felt that they've been disconnected from this issue, and this would have been an opportunity to become more connected to it. I stand firmly opposed to the rules as they're proposed and to the way that they've been proposed. And the crux of my argument is that the rules do not protect public health at the same level that the 20% rule would if it were enforced. And using Stone's own data presented in evidence and analyzing it, we at the department feel that if the 20% rule was enforced, that we would see as much as 260 pounds per day less particulate emitted than we do now. And I've heard no arguments that compare to that. I've heard no arguments that say anything about that level of detail. I've heard, gee, this state does it this way and this state does it that way, and I think that's a very odd way to state that this rule is a good rule. I think comparisons are important, but they don't stand on their own feet. So until I hear some proposal that shows an equivalent amount of reduction, I will oppose the rules and the substance of the rules. I also oppose the rules because of the way they were proposed to us. I've been involved in enforcement, particularly environmental enforcement, enough to know that changing the rule is not an acceptable way around enforcing the rule. And in fact, there is no acceptable way around enforcing the rule. I know that sometimes enforcement gets complex. I know that mistakes can be made. I know that there are close calls. I know there are things that are hard for people not close to the process to understand. But I have been close to this process, as has my staff and my board and our attorney for 2 years, and that is not the case here. I think a mistake has been made, and I think there's an opportunity to reverse that mistake by rejecting these rules and thereby rejecting the process that brought them to us. And I call upon my state colleagues in enforcement and in public health, and they are my state colleagues, which is why I'm particularly troubled that my colleagues have taken the action that they've taken. And I call upon them to just stand up and do their job, admit that this was a mistake, and reject the rules, and try to correct the breach of public process that we've experienced. People here tonight are aware of the breach of public process that took place because the stipulation was entered into. They may not be aware of what we've experienced at closer range. We did ask for the first hearing a couple of years ago to be in Missoula. That was denied. We did try to intervene as a party with interest, and we were denied that as well. If we don't have standing as an interested party in this case, who has it? I think that was a breach of the public process. And now we see a binding stipulation brought forward and then brought to the public. I finally have a message to the board, and I understand it is a new board. I am not trying to say, and I don't think you've heard anybody here tonight say, that we aren't all responsible for the air quality. Stone is, we are, we as local officials are. Everybody in this room has shared some of that responsibility. But there's only one party that has any authority on this issue, and that is the difference between the State Health Board and the rest of us. We've given them that power, and they haven't acted properly with that power, and we've lost our power to protect ourselves and our public health because of that. And that, to me, as a colleague, as a public official, is totally unacceptable. And I ask them to reverse their position, to reject the rules, and to reconfirm the 20% rule. And I'm hopeful that now with two new members of the board, that we possibly have a chance that they'll do that. Thank you.
Alan, if I could ask you a question. Your testimony referred to the enforcement of the 20% opacity limitation resulting in decreased particulates. Was that from the testimony in the declaratory ruling that was put in by Stone? You're talking
Yes,
about
yes, I actually have a chart where we charted out their evidence, the facts that they gave.
Just for the record, it might be helpful if that chart were included in the record for this proceeding, since this is a separate proceeding. Thank you. Jim Carlson.
Mr. Hutchinson, my name's Jim Carlson. I'm Director of the Environmental Health Division in the Missoula City County Health Department. The Missoula City County Health Department is opposed to the proposed changes in Rule 16.8, 1404, and 16.8, 1413 for the following reasons. The number 4 recovery boiler at the Frenchtown Pulp Mill was built in '72, governed by a 20% opacity rule that was clear and unambiguous. Additions to the mill and additions to the opacity rule have not changed this fact in any way. My second point is that number 4 recovery is currently subject to a 20% opacity requirement as clearly stated condition of the current operating permit prepared by the department and accepted by Stone. See Section 2F, Item 28, quote, Stone shall not cause or authorize to be discharged into the atmosphere visible emissions that exhibit an opacity of 20% or greater based on a 6-minute average from any source, stack or fugitive, installed or altered after November 23, 1968, unless otherwise specified in ARM 16.8, 1404, and 16.8, 1401. Number 3, the process of promulgating these rules by stipulation makes a sham of the intent of the rulemaking procedure. The rulemaking stipulation between Stone and the State Department of Health approved for hearing by the State Board of Health for a rulemaking process which is to go before the State Board of Health, who has already issued a declaratory ruling in Stone's favor on the same subject, is a misuse of the quasi-legislative function of the board. The stipulation has effectively shut out the public and other entities from having substantive input to the rule. 4, there have been no documents or information presented with the proposed rules which justify the need for these rules or explain the impact of the proposed rules on emissions or air quality. Many requests for this information have been made both before and immediately after the stipulation was finalized. However, no information has been received for us to review. We can, however, draw some conclusions from the permit combined with data supplied with Stone. We know that the permit allows particulate emissions of 1,253 pounds per day with a monthly average not to exceed 928 pounds per day. We know that Stone has testified that, quote, a 6-minute opacity limit of 20% restricts particulate limits to about 200 pounds per day. Subtracting the effective 200 pound per day limit based on 20% opacity from the permitted limit of 1,253 pounds per day, we get 1,053 fewer pounds per day of particulate emissions from Stone number 4 recovery. That's a lot of particulate reduction. For comparison's sake, it's equal to removing about 1,195 of the very worst wood stoves burning 8 hours a day from the valley, or removing about 20,000 low-emission pellet stoves burning 24 hours a day. We also know that permitted emissions is not the same as actual emissions. Based on Stone's self-monitoring reports, number 4 recovery emitted a monthly average of 461 pounds per day for the period February 1993 through September 1994. Assuming the 200 pound per day equivalency number submitted by Stone is accurate, enforcement of the 20% rule would lessen emissions by at least 261 pounds per day from the number 4 recovery boiler. Most recently, we've received some data from Stone which places serious doubt on the need for any change at all to the rule. The data from Stone is average opacity in 6-minute increments for March 11th, 12th, and 13th, 1995 from all 3 recovery boilers. That is 240 6-minute readings for each of the 3 boilers over a period of 3 days. The proposed rule would place an opacity requirement of 35% on number 3 boiler, while the data indicates that during 726 minute readings, opacity never exceeded 10% and averaged about 5%. Number 5 recovery boiler proposed to have a new standard of 30% opacity. It never exceeded an opacity of 7% with an average of about 3%. Number 4 recovery proposed to have a 30% opacity standard, exceeded 20% only once with a 21.7% opacity reading. This data indicates that Stone can, with current pollution control equipment, meet emission limits of 15%, 25%, and 10% on boilers 3, 4, and 5 respectively. Because the state did not obtain data with regard to impacts of the stipulation for rulemaking on air emissions or potential impacts on Stone's operations, it negotiated a WAIA rule with real air quality impact against other requirements that have substantially less real impacts on air quality. 5, Stone has continually pointed to the 35% New Source Performance Standard rule as a rationale for lowering the opacity standard on number 4 recovery. The federal standards should be viewed as minimums and not as a panacea. It is no secret that Missoula has meteorology and topography that combine to create an extremely sensitive airshed, where normally adequate emission standards are entirely inadequate. It should also be noted that according to federal law, EPA should have been updating the NSPS standard every 8 years. The 35% opacity standard for recovery boilers hasn't been reviewed since it was first promulgated in 1976. The 35% New Source Performance Standard rule clearly does not represent anything close to the state-of-the-art of electrostatic precipitators and craft recovery boilers. 6, although it has not been advertised as such, this rule change represents a proposed amendment to the SIP and eventually to a federally enforceable emissions permit for Stone. The Missoula City County Air Pollution Control Board is responsible for the preparation of particulate and carbon monoxide SIP in Missoula County. The proposed rule change applies only to Stone Container located in Missoula County, and the Missoula County Air Pollution Control Program has regulatory control of Stone Container on a routine basis during air pollution alerts. Weakening the state rule will not change the applicability of the 20% requirement of the Missoula program during alerts. The recovery boiler emissions were identified as a major particulate source in the Missoula SIP, chemical mass balance particulate apportionment. These facts mean that the proposed rule change and subsequent weakening of a clearly enforceable permit limitation are modifications to the Missoula particulate SIP. And as a result, the Missoula Air Pollution Control Board and the city and the county of Missoula should be required to approve such SIP modifications before they can be approved by EPA. 7, this rule has apparently been crafted to relax the emissions requirements of number 4 recovery, which has difficulty meeting the current standards, and tightens the emission standards on 2 other boilers that will have no problem meeting the new standard with existing equipment. The baselines for emission trade-off in this situation should be calculated as if number 4 were in compliance with the 20% opacity rule. We assert that the proposed rule will not result in emissions reductions equal to enforcement of the current rule. The weakening of the clearly stated requirement in the current permit without adequate emissions offset should be considered as backsliding and not approvable by EPA, or the state for that matter. 8, the proposed rule requires reporting of 6-minute opacity averages to the Air Quality Division for boilers 3 and 4. The mill has had opacity monitoring in place on all recovery boilers since the early 70s. The requirement for additional reporting in 6-minute increments constitutes a fairly simple change in data logging computer equipment and upgrades to federal criteria. If the department cannot require this type of monitoring reports via permit amendment when it has information indicating that violations are or may be occurring, then the rules should be amended to give the department that authority. It should not be necessary for the department to give concessions of a weakened rule to a permit holder in order to obtain reasonable compliance information. We also assert that the department could require this information without training important concessions at the time Stone is issued a Title V permit as required by the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. Number 9, one of the biggest errors on the part of the Air Quality Division throughout this process has been the lack of on-site presence at Stone and at other state-regulated sources in Missoula County. It is difficult to become familiar with a source that covers several square miles when the inspections occur 1 or 2 days a year. Billings has had field personnel stationed there for many years. We feel that an inspector should be located in Missoula to ensure consistent enforcement of requirements. The Missoula City County Health Department continues to offer space for an air quality inspector to be stationed in Missoula. 10, throughout the late 70s and 80s, our local Air Pollution Control Board has asked the citizens and small businesses of Missoula to make many sacrifices to clean up our air. Homeowners on unpaved road have had to pay thousands of dollars to pave over 20 miles of urban streets. Wood stove owners are only allowed to install the very best stoves available. Old stoves are required to be removed at the time of sale of a home. Existing stove owners are fined if they burn during a Stage 1 alert. City and county have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on street sweeping equipment and low-emission street de-icers and sanding materials. Most of the old industrial air pollution sources under Missoula County jurisdiction have been retired or replaced with new equipment. There is only one industrial source under Missoula County jurisdiction that is subject to an opacity standard greater than 20%, a hog fuel boiler at White Pine and Sash that was built before 1968. During the late 70s, 80s, and 90s, when everyone else has been cleaning up and using newer, less polluting technology, Stone has made no significant changes in its particulate emissions. They've violated the ambient hydrogen sulfide standards hundreds of times, and they've been allowed to burn plastics in their hog fuel boilers. If we're going to have continued cooperation from the public in cleaning the air, it's imperative that the public believes that companies like Stone are being required to do their fair share. There are a growing number of people in Missoula who do not feel that Stone and the Air Quality Division are doing enough to ensure that Stone's emissions are as low as possible. For these reasons, we are opposed to the approval of the proposed rule. It's time that Stone live up to its responsibility to the community by complying with the same generic rule that other sources throughout the county and across the state have already had to comply with. Thank you.
Jim, can I ask you a couple questions? Sure. First of all, thank you. In regard to your point number 4 in your letter, you mentioned that the actual particulate emissions, I believe under the current rule, amount to 261 pounds per day. Again, is that from Mr. Weeks' testimony in the testification?
No, that's from emissions data submitted by Stone Container to the State Air Quality Bureau and our department on a quarterly basis.
Okay. I guess I'd like to have that included in the record if you have it available.
All we've done is taken recovery boiler emissions in 1993 and 1994 from February to September, which is the latest set that we have graphed that. The blue line above at 928 pounds per day represents their monthly average permit limit. They also had a daily permit limit that's 1,253 pounds per day, I believe. The 200-pound per day line represents what Stone indicated in its testimony, and the State Board of Health included in its findings of fact as the equivalent emissions for 20% from for recovery. The red line represents the actual measured emissions using a correlation between the opacity monitor and actual stack monitors as reported by Stone on a monthly average basis to the Air Quality Bureau. The point being that if they're required to come down below 20%, according to Stone's own testimony, that has an equivalent of about 200 pounds per day. If you average out that red line, that's 462 pounds per day. So the difference there is about 262 pounds per day. Does that answer your question?
That answers that one. I have one more. In your, I have a hard copy that Ellen gave. Thanks. In that same portion of your written testimony, you suggest that data indicates that Stone can, with current pollution control equipment, meet emission limits of 15% on number 3, 25% on number 4, and 10% on number 5. Can you give me the source the data
That was
source?
a letter addressed from Stone Container to Garen Smith, a member of the Air Pollution Control Board.
That's Exhibit 2 to my testimony.
Okay, thank you, just so we have it included in there.
That's included in the record, Exhibit 2 to my testimony.
And for the record, that's Bill Rosbach talking.
That data is 3 days of data, similar or identical to the kind of data that would be required if the stipulation is fully followed, meaning 6-minute increments for all 3 boilers, 24 hours a day. Looking at that 3 days of data, which is the only data that we have of that type, one can draw the conclusions that I've made.
Thank you. Brian Schwann?
Thank you. I'll try to make this very brief. My name is Bryony Schwann. I'm the Director of Women's Voices for the Earth. The following is a statement of concerns from Women's Voices for the Earth regarding the agreement between Stone Container and the State Board of Health to allow the corporation to increase their capacity at the number 4 recovery boiler from 20% to 35%, and Stone Container's responsibility to the health and well-being of Montana citizens in general. Given Missoula's existing air quality problems, we are concerned about an increase in air pollution from the largest industrial source in the valley and the potential health and environmental consequences. Our concerns are based on the fact that Stone has been cited for hundreds of air and water quality violations by Montana state agencies and the Environmental Protection Agency. Despite these violations, the corporation has never been fined or penalized. It is our belief that Stone should do its part to clean up the Missoula airshed by working to reduce its emissions rather than increase them. We are particularly concerned about the use of chlorine and burning of toxic waste at the mill and ask that Stone Container and the state work to find alternatives, a number of which are available and already in use in other mills across the country. From 1987 to 1992, the Frenchtown Mill was responsible for discharging 399,300 pounds of chlorine and 167,600 pounds of chlorine dioxide into the air. When chlorine gas comes into contact with organic molecules containing carbon, it bonds tightly with the carbon atoms and forms organic chlorines. The main area of concern regarding the health risks associated with organic chlorines has historically been cancer, but recent research has discovered that organic chlorines can mimic estrogen and other hormones and disrupt the endocrine system and thus disrupt normal development in wildlife and humans. Researchers in 20 countries report increased cancer rates that cannot be accounted for in other ways, with increased mortality from multiple myeloma, prostate cancer up 23%, breast and testicular cancer up 50%. 30 years ago, a woman had a 1 in 20 chance of getting breast cancer by the time she was 85. Now her chance is 1 in 9. Some researchers believe that this may be due to chlorinated organics stored in the fat tissue of women. Recent studies have also revealed that sperm counts in men have fallen 42% since 1940, along with increased birth defects in males with undescended testicles. There are also countless examples of endocrine disruption in wildlife populations, decreased hatching success in birds, and I won't list them all. You can have them in my written testimony. We ask the State Board of Health and Environmental Sciences and Stone Container to put the health of Missoula Valley residents, both human and non-human, as their top priority, and find ways in which this mill can operate in a manner that is safe to all concerned. We join with other groups in asking the board to include the attached list of demands in their agreement with Stone Container. That's the same list of demands that was put forth earlier by the other groups. And just to summarize, I'd like to say that we are absolutely opposed to the concept of increasing the corporation's emissions rate up to 35% from 20%. We think this is an outrage. We think the whole process has been an outrage, and we would like to see something done about it. Thank you.
Excuse me, does your written, or do your written comments include the health studies you were talking about? Could you please, so we can include them in the record? Thank you. Dan McCaffrey?
Good evening. My name's Dan McCaffrey. I'm the chairman of the Missoula City County Air Quality Advisory Council. And I'm here to read you the council's position paper on this. Before I start, I guess I should state that it's a 12-member council. One member of the council is an employee of Stone Container, and she made a forceful statement on behalf of the 35% opacity, and the liaison with the board, Garen Smith, made an impassioned statement to our council in support of being conciliatory. However, the council took this position, which is just the consensus. So let me begin. The Missoula Air Quality Advisory Council has reviewed the various issues concerning opacity limits on kraft paper mill recovery boilers. The council's consensus is as follows. In the interest of reducing Missoula's chronic airshed problem with excessive particulate concentrations, the most restrictive opacity limits should be imposed. If there is a question between two limits, i.e. recovery boiler number 4 at 20% versus 35% opacity, the Air Quality Advisory Council can find little to no basis for a higher limit. It is the Air Quality Advisory Council's position, based on documentation provided by Stone Container, that the number 4 recovery boiler can function effectively at 20% opacity and with minimal limit exceedances. The Air Quality Advisory Council further believes that a larger opacity limit simply provides the capacity for increased production. Any future increased production would defeat the ongoing efforts by the Missoula citizenry to reduce particulate. Considerable financial sacrifice has been and is currently being borne by Missoula's populace in upgrading the efficiency of wood stoves as part of recent regulations. The Air Quality Advisory Council further believe that the new proposed opacity limit of 35% for the number 3 recovery boiler should be mandated and, if at all possible, lowered further. The documentation provided by Stone Container indicates that the limit for the number 5 boiler could easily be reduced to 20% opacity without affecting current production rates. Opacity at all 3 Stone Container recovery boilers is now being continuously measured, and 6-minute averages are being calculated. A review of this data and associated parameter data should support the Air Quality Advisory Council's position. It is not the intent or purpose of the Air Quality Advisory Council to financially burden nor unduly affect the production rates of Stone Container. However, the public health and welfare should be paramount when choosing between 2 different source emission rates, as measured by opacity, to an overburdened airshed. The Air Quality Advisory Council respectfully requests that the Montana State Board of Health consider our comments on an issue of intense local concern. Sincerely, the Council, by Dan McCaffrey, Chairman. Thank you.
Dan, based on what you just read, would the council have any objection to passage of the rules if the limits were changed to those suggested by the council in its memorandum or written statement?
You mean as stated here?
Yes. In other words, if we kept the rule package as is, but you changed the opacity limitations from 30% to 20% for the post-68 and down to 30% for the pre-68, would that satisfy or be in accord with the council's thinking on this issue?
Well, on the face of it, I guess that certainly sounds like an improvement, and I would suppose that we would. I would want to talk to the council, but that certainly sounds like a concession.
Susan, you have to come forward for the microphone to pick you
just to say what a great council we are, I would think that we would not want to summarily approve anything that, just like the other county and city officials have asked for more data, more possibilities, more research, we would want to look into it a little more closely and see what the optimum opacity we could ask for would be.
Okay.
Probably, don't you think?
Well, you can see the position I'm in here.
I'm not asking you to make a statement for the council. I'm just trying to clarify what you just read. Are you advocating lower limits be contained within the current rule package, or are you advocating that the current rule package not be passed and we study what those limits should be?
I would say that the current rulemaking should not be passed and we restudy it. I wish I was in a position to say, hey, I've got the numbers and I think you ought to go with them, but I'm not. I'm simply the chairman of the council.
Thank you. Craig Sweet? Craig Sweet? Could you check Bill and see if he's still in? Thank you. During the meantime, is Matt Thomas here? Okay, for the record, Matt did submit a written comment on the back of his sheet, and that will be included. Let me read into the record what he has on his sign-up sheet. For the record, the City Council vote to have Mike Craig read into record our opposition to your action was 7 aye, 1 nay, 2 pass, and 2 absent. Thanks, Craig Sweet, Missoula City Council. Matt Thomas has left, and his written comment on his sign-up sheet will be included in the record. Suzanne Truman.
Hi, Mr. Hutchinson. I'm a Missoula City resident, 1107 Poplar. I moved to Missoula from Gallatin Valley 2 years ago. Since I've had a chronic condition of respiratory infection that I've been fighting. I'd like to state that I'm very disturbed that the Board of Health is not here, but I thank you for being here. I presume that while we're here breathing the toxic air from Stone Container, they're breathing clean air of this big sky country. I find it very upsetting that this is only the second and the last meeting before the vote goes in, when it's Missoula's health and Missoula citizens' health that's at stake. The State Health Board's job is to protect Montana's environment and its citizens. Your job is not to aid a multinational corporation in profiteering, which is greed at the expense of Montana's health. Stone Container should have the continuous opacity monitors, but without a condition that they have an opacity increase. I firmly believe that they should remain at 20% in states where they're required to abide by the law of 20% opacity. They follow it. In states where they can use up to 45 and some that were higher, I don't remember the statistics, they put out as much as they can. Stone Container is here to make money. Stone Container is making a lot of money. Stone Container can afford to protect its citizens, the citizens of Missoula. The State Health Board's job is not to protect Stone Container. Stone Container has never said that they're going to lay anybody off. So if there's an incentive that the health board has that they're protecting jobs or job security, I don't buy it. I would like to know what the incentive is, and I'd like to know whose pockets are being lined in Helena while the Missoula air is killing us. I presume it has something to do with the 2 board members that are gone, and one of the board members, Mr. Court, I believe, who was directly selling timber to Stone Container. I ask that the board that now consists of different members reconsider their vote, do not allow an increase. You're the Board of Health for the state of Montana. You're paid to protect, not destroy this last best place. Missoula, Montana needs your vote. Stone Container does not. Thank you.
For the record, Suzanne has a sign-up sheet also with a written comment on the back, and that will be part of the record. Adam Rubin. Once again, Mr. Rubin has a written comment on the back of his sheet, which will be included into the record. Benton Knowles. Is it Brian Knowles? I'm sorry.
For the record, my name is Brian Knowles, and I live at 231 East Franklin. And I guess if I represent anyone, I represent my generation. I'd like to say something to Stone Corporation Management. I don't know a lot of the facts and figures, and I don't know a lot of the statistics. But what I do know is that I'm scared. I'm scared for my future because industries and corporations such as yours continue to ignore the signs that we are destroying our environment and the earth in which we live. I can only hope that you'll listen to the voice of the future. And I just want to let you know that you're a symbol of how ignorant our society can be. And please, I ask you to maybe change the way you look at things. Thank you.
Amy Hush. Sorry.
This is going to be short. Flying into Missoula for the first time several months ago, all of my hope-filled dreams of Montana as the last best place were totally blown. The first thing I saw of this town was Stone Container's gargantuan smokestacks. My gut reaction was, something is really messed up here. I still haven't gotten over the absurdity of it. As I've become more educated about the multitude of air quality violations issued to Stone Container, and upon discovering that they've continued to endanger the health of all Missoulians with little more than a slap on the wrist, I cannot help but be shocked. Missoulians, by and large, seem to really care about their community and the health of their environment. Therefore, I find it hard to imagine why a dinosaur like Stone's Frenchtown Mill is given a carte blanche to pollute indiscriminately. Aesthetics aside, it looks like a mess because it is a mess. This industry is unsustainable as it stands. We've got to work together to make this town's air, to better this town's air, and not to protect one single multinational corporation at the expense of the entire town. I'm registered to vote in this town, and along with all the residents, I deserve a say in the quality of the air that I have to breathe. I joined thousands of fellow citizens in demanding that the following be included in the agreement between Stone Container Corp. And the Montana Board of Health and Environmental Sciences, at the very least, including zero chlorine use facility-wide, including the conversion of bleach pulping process to a non-toxic alternative process, disallow burning of toxic and solid waste such as plastic, PVC, and styrofoam in the waste fuel boiler. For the recovery boilers, maximum 20% opacity for all recovery boilers, and reduce the allowable opacity for the number 4 to 10% by 2000. Incentives for converting the mill to 100% recycled post-consumer fiber operation, and most importantly, citizen enforcement provisions and local jurisdiction. My name is Amy, for the record, and I live at 402 South 2nd West, number 2.
Rachel Simmons?
My name is Rachel Simons, and I'm here pretty much representing myself. I've been to the hearings, I've been attending them, I've been keeping up on the issue, reading on it. I don't think I need to restate what's been said enough times here. I'll just tell you the conclusions that I've gathered from it. One is the value of the product received from Stone Container is not equal to the price being paid by the residents of this valley or the environment. And another thing, this is directly for the Board of Health, your job is not to protect industry from the citizens, it's to protect the citizens from industry. And then thirdly, I'd like to say, someone who repeatedly and flagrantly violates existing laws should not be allowed to create those laws behind closed doors. The citizens don't seem to really have that much of a real say in. And Stone should deal with the people of this valley as opposed to paying good lawyers to go talk to representatives of the state. And then lastly, Stone doesn't need to threaten to close down. They're making quite a bit of money at this one, and some of their other operations aren't doing that well and are kind of being offset by this one. And lastly, I'd like to say I support the citizens' proposal.
Jean Simons?
Thank you very much. My name is Jean Simons. I'm here as a citizen of Missoula. I am not well informed on this subject. The nature of my information is strictly personal. When I have lived all over Idaho and western Montana, my family moved quite a lot. When I came to Missoula as an adult, I noticed that people here were sick more often and for longer than in other places that I have lived in Montana. Just guessing, it seemed like maybe 3 or 4 illnesses, not very serious, but colds and flus per winter per person that lasted significantly longer than I was used to in the other places I've lived. Whereas in other places it might be like 1 or 2 a season. I know that I had also lived here as a child. One of the reasons that my mother told me that we moved was because of her own health problems. I have talked to people in Bozeman who used to live in Missoula who stated the reason for their leaving as being the air and the effects that it had on their health. If I remember this correctly, I think one woman's exact words were that she saw no reason to live in Montana and be sick all the time. I think that the point that I'm trying to make here is that all of these things that we've been talking about air quality, pollution, water quality, has a real impact on people's lives. It causes them to leave. It causes them to leave the Missoula area. That is money that is leaving the Missoula area, and possibly Montana. I don't know enough to say whether or not it's Montana. Okay, I also, I've heard all of the deals about, you know, how much pollution there is and the legal things, and I believe Missoulians in general are outraged by this, and I believe that they are not being listened to. I believe that the fact that they are not being listened to makes them feel emasculated. This, you know, this isn't good for the psyche of the city, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But this is my testimony. Thank you.
That concludes the sign-up sheets I have for our opponents. Are there any other people that wish to testify as opponents? Thanks.
Should I just go ahead and do it?
Just go right ahead.
All right. My name's Sue Bradford, and I'm here representing the Wounded Earth Environmental Project. And we are in support of the statement issued in conjunction with Native Forest Network and other local groups opposed to this action. In my view, it's totally unwarranted and unwise to expand the pollution in this valley. It's already a critical problem. It's already affecting the lungs of our children and the health of many people. I know I ride a bicycle around town a lot, and on bad days, my lungs burn. It's an unpleasant sensation, and I wish it on no one. And it's 1995, and the human race is kind of in the process of realizing that we have to take care of the environment and respect it. And many of us are trying to grow up and change our lives in order to reflect that. And it really doesn't help if the powers that be decide to start going backwards on us all of a sudden. We need to go forward on protecting the earth. We've gone about 20% maybe in the last 20 years of what we really need to be doing to respect the earth and live with it in a healthy and constructive way and establish some kind of balance. What we need to be doing is giving back to the earth. We can't just live in a way that takes and pollutes and messes things up. We have to be focusing our energy on earth restoration and holding the damage to the limit that it's already gotten to and reversing those limits. And I think it's a serious problem, and I think it's serious that right in our own homes now we're starting to lose ground that we've been struggling for many decades. So along those same lines, I take seriously the clause of the Montana Constitution that says I have a right to a clean and healthful environment. And I would, you know, be obliged if the city and county and the state agencies that are charged with protecting those rights took that job more seriously than the economic persuasive arguments of Stone Container Corporation, because I think citizens' rights kind of are the foundation of civil government and come before the privilege of doing business within those terms. And I think the Constitution makes it clear that we do have the right to a safe, healthful environment, or a clean and healthful environment, to be literal. And I think it's been established through a number of studies over the years, the effect of the pollution in this valley on people's lungs. Increasing that benefits no one. I think the only responsible thing is to reverse this action. Thank you.
Sue, can you give us some indication of what the Wounded Earth Environmental Project is, and who comprises this membership, where it's located?
Well, I'd simply say it's a group of people dedicated to earth restoration, that our membership is informal, and we're trying to build a consensus for earth restoration throughout our community on every level, and also the restoration of people's values to a level that's in balance with recognizing that we have a balance of responsibilities towards people on the one hand and the earth on the other, and it's up to creativity, human ingenuity, working together and building a new consensus and a new vision of where America and our communities can go, and not just reverting back to some 50s vision that you know, really is going extinct quickly.
Is it located here in
We are based in Missoula, Montana.
Thank you. Any other opponents that wish to make a statement on the record? We will then move to the statements of those who've indicated they are neutral on the proposed rule package. Garen?
I can see I made a tactical error in order to, doesn't matter. I made a tactical error because I have only 2 of the 3 components here. Most of those people who were so emotional and worried about what's going on and were cheering and clapping have left. What I'd like to do is convince everybody that we're talking to the wrong agenda. And I'm probably flapping in the wind by myself on this. I tried with the Air Quality Advisory Council, and you could hear that in Dan's testimony, that I made an impassioned plea. And I'll show you why I'm confused and think the agenda is wrong. I'll say that I think everybody in this room is vitally concerned with the health issues that are under discussion, and we certainly have the business people sitting back there. I don't think they need to be at cross purposes, and we need to change our thinking so that we can work together. We can buy more public health benefits by cooperating than we can in this adversarial type relationship. I firmly believe that the vocal crowd that left are responsible from the previous generation in getting in place some of the environmental legislation, which has made a difference. Industry has paid heavily trying to meet those demands. Some of them are rather difficult to achieve, very expensive, and that's caused problems for businesses. I work very closely with all the health officials in this room. I know they're interested in public health. I don't think fighting over where the limit is going to make any difference. That's not talking about reducing it. It may force somebody into the corner in reducing it, but we can see how long that process takes. I would contend that if we start cooperating, we can make progress this week at improving public health and at the same time trying to help Jerry and Ed and Laura make their business look better. I don't see that they have to be at cross purposes, because I think if we work in the right way, we can spend any investment on Stone's part to buy the best public health benefit. And I think the agenda we're talking to tonight misses the point entirely. Now let me present some of my data here. The data that's been talked about a couple of times was sent to me, although it was shared with other people. Maybe the difference is I'm not going to try to nail Stone to the wall with their data. I want to try to understand what's going on. I'm a scientist, and my personal challenge for my career has been to try to use my science to help the public health and the environment. So I need numbers to work with. So that's why I kept asking Laura, give me some numbers, give me some numbers. And now I'm confused.
Garen, maybe before we go any further, you should identify yourself, your full name and your affiliation.
Garen Smith, 2015 26th Avenue, resident of Missoula. I'm Associate Professor of Chemistry at the University of Montana. I also serve on the Air Pollution Control Board and am its liaison to the Citizens Air Quality Advisory Council.
Thanks.
So here's the typical tabular data that appears in regulatory reports. I'm a picture person. I need to look at it as mountain ranges or graphs. So I entered all the data into my computer and tried to make some pictures that I could understand. I learned some things here. So this is recovery boiler number 3, opacity for March 11th. Now, all of the debate tonight has been over where to set the dashed line. The top one at 40%, which is where boiler number 3 qualified for under the old regulations, or to set it at 35. Here's what is actually being monitored by the INSTAC monitors. So I guess I missed the point about why you're arguing over those lines when we're down here. I was wondering about these curious spikes that showed up. I said, there's something they do at 7:30, 3:30 p.m., and 11:30. So, wonder what that is. I don't know much about the plant, so I went over and asked Ed and Jerry about that, and they said, oh, that's the instrument going through its calibration run. They should all be about the same height. Bingo. So, like I say, I need to look at data and see what's going on. So there I see that the particulates are way below what we're arguing over. So missed the point there. Now the only violation that was pointed out in the data was for number 4 boiler. Here's the number 4 data. I've got a copy of all these plots for the record, and I have extra packets if some of you would like to have them too. And here's the one lone spike that showed up above 20. Guess what? That isn't a violation. If you hold up these calibration runs for the instrument, that's calibration run on the monitor again. If that's what those blips are, it coincides exactly. In fact, you can see them lining up here. 8-hour time interval.
Mr. Hutchison, can I respond to Darren's question?
No, we're going to hear him just as we
Okay.
heard everyone.
So I'm just trying to look at the data and learn something from it. So this is the one that everybody's arguing about. You can see where the 20% line is. That's what some people contend the law reads, and from what I've seen from the health department, that's what it probably should have been. 30 is the negotiated rule. We're only at half of the level that the 20% opacity talks about, a third of the level of the 30%. Again, the plant is operating within its limits. Now, the percent opacity isn't the total story. You have to have airflow measurements too. What I would like to see in our community is enough trust on the part of health officials and Stone that we can share data in order to try to really see what's going into the airship, and then see if we can come up with some refinements in how things are done at the plant to reduce that. And that's where we'll buy some real public health gain. Just to make the story complete, here's the recovery boiler 4 data, recovery boiler 5 data, and it looks just like the recovery boiler 3 data. The lines are so high above where they're operating. Why are we arguing over this? That's not. If Stone is trying to be forthright with me, and I think they are, Ed is new to his position, Laura is new to her position. I think I've seen a lot of interest in their part in working with me on a community team approach to looking at what's going into the airship. I wholeheartedly agree that using the continuous opacity monitors will help us know what's going on out there. Let's not attack Stone if they give us data so that we can see what's going on out there in order to decide where we should target our work. Now, I want to talk about making some progress, not about setting some rules to be addressed. So I'm interested in trying to work together as a team. Here's an overhead from a conference held by TAPI, which is the Technical Association of the Pulp and Paper Industry, to which I was invited a year and a half ago. Spent 3 days in Oregon talking with chief executive officers, vice presidents for research. They're concerned about their industry and solving problems, and they'll even fund projects to build community relationships to work towards those involving the academic community. I'd like to have us work on those. Here's the cover page from Guidelines for Research Funding Program to TAPI, and they're talking specifically about to support research and education and part of an overall effort, I better look down here, to outreach to the academic and research community at large. We should be part of the team. Like I say, again, I would absolutely be disappointed in spending $5 million on a new precipitator, on a recovery boiler until we know that's the best place we can spend money for Missoula's air good. Now, I don't know how good my data is, and I need help from Stone in figuring out what's going on here. Lost my organization here. I've got this data from a PM10 inventory in 1992. It lists all sorts of particulate sources on the property out there. And again, I don't know how accurate this is. This is where we need to have the team approach. So this was gleaned off of information that I picked up at another hearing. This is where PM10 inventory was claimed to be in 1992. You can see recovery boiler number 4 is over here, and it comprised 11.3% of the pounds per hour. If everything was running simultaneously, I presume that those percentages would hold. We're talking about putting $5 million into cutting a wedge out of here. I guess I'd like to go around the plant and see what kind of particulates are coming out of each of these sources, because some particulates aren't as bad as others. Large particulates aren't as dangerous as small particulates. Organic particulates are worse than inorganic particulates usually. I want to see where we can spend dollars out of the plant. Dollars are going to be spent to buy the best kind of reduction in PM10s. Overall, PM10s may not be what we should look at if we're trying to look at the best public health gain. So this is the sort of team approach we need. And I guess I see a need in the regulatory climate for some trust to be put out on the table. And I need some indication from Stone of trust that we're not going to come clean your clock out if you work with us. Because I think we need to work at what we're all here for, which is trying to protect the public health, part of which is the mental health of the people. I guess all of the people that spoke and left, those are the ones that felt they got left out of the process. And that's why, as a member of the Air Pollution Control Board, I supported the lawsuit with the state board's actions, because it leaves us out of the loop. I guess I would like to be a spokesperson for the community in trying to form a cooperative team, to use my position at the university to be maybe a little bit more neutral territory, so that the people who left can come and participate in the discussion, so that Stone can come participate in the discussion, so that the health officers can come and participate in the discussions. I have some ideas for what we should be working on too. And again, I've scrambled my slides so horribly. Got all worked up here. Like I say, I don't think that we need to be at cross purposes. Something that I'm really interested in working with is neural network controlled processes. And these can supplement the human operators. They're computer learning systems that can take very massive, complex amounts of data and see patterns in them before human brain processors can. And I think they can help see what kind of conditions are leading up to an upset or a release. I'm also a fan of the simplex technique, which is an experimental design where in a minimum number of experiments you can find the optimal set of reaction conditions to bring about an end result. I think those are are techniques that some of us at the university would like to work in concert with Stone and Kathy in trying to put in place at the plant. And lastly, I'm aware that the Missoula District of the Lolo National Forest has been working with Stone on a plan to reduce fuel loading in the forests immediately north of the city. And rather than burn the material that's removed from there, they've worked out an agreement with Stone to use that at the plant. If we're looking at the total airshed, inputs from slash burns and agricultural burns, those all are in the same airshed. I think that's a creative way to remove one source, and Stone's participating in that. And I know that the Eureka pellet mill people, who are located in town here too, have talked about trying to produce an industrial type pellet. Pellets burn cleaner than unprocessed material. So I think those are things we're going to have to work at too. This is a potential for new technology development in the Missoula area that we can then market elsewhere. It's looking at an economic resource base while we work on our problem. Anything we solve here can be marketed elsewhere to a profit. That's what we should be doing, is trying to nurture businesses to be as best as we can and still keep the health element in mind. And I don't see why it can't be that. And maybe I'm naive, but all this energy that's gone into arguing over those dashed lines, and it looks to me like the plant can operate below those. I believe those data. I don't know if there's something unusual about those days, but even if they aren't truly representative, I'm going to work to try to come up with an economic way for particulates to be released. Now, what I would like to see, I guess here's a leap of faith that I'm asking from Stone. I worked real hard with the wood stove regulations and the paving regulations, and those changes should, over the next 10 years, bring about a 40% reduction in PM10s in the airshed. And that's the citizens working on the particulates. Now, I know from looking at reams of data and spending literally hundreds of hours poring over it, that the particulates in Missoula are mostly from road dust and wood stoves. That's why I worked so hard on those regulations. But I think we can buy some more public health input if we work as a community team with Stone to formulate a 10-year plan that will start to address maybe looking at a 40% reduction in emissions at the plant too. I don't know how feasible that is economically. And like I say, I think we should look at the sources, characterize what kind of particulates they are, and try to buy the best public health gain we can for every dollar that's spent out there. I think if we come up with some innovative technology that really addresses sources of hazardous particulates in the pulp industry, that those are going to be the best public relations dollars that Stone can spend. So I guess that's my spiel. I hate to see so much energy and time and talent arguing over those dashed lines up there when we could be working at improving the problem. So what's wrong with my thinking? If you want to send something to me at the university and tell me where I'm wrong, I'd like to know. But I really think that with just looking at a 10-year plan, someone's going to have to invest some dollars somewhere over the next 10 years. And if we work together with networks and simplex type experimental designs, I think we can really, with minimal investments, improve what the plant's doing. And at the same time, work on air quality. So that's what that. I think and that's what that whole thing in the paper was about. So we should be pulling together and using the talent in this room to start working at the levels that are there. And who cares where the limit is? Let's work at what's there and try to make it smaller. That's what we're all here for. So I guess I've been real frustrated with the dialogue is looking at the regulations so intensely that we're missing working on the problem. So I'm probably flapping in the breeze by myself, but thank you. And I hope Stone will continue sharing data with me, because I'm a numbers kind of guy.
Aaron, for the record, can you submit the hard copies of your...
There's a hard copy of the plot. And here's text content of the slides that I may have shown.
Tony Tweesdale? It really wouldn't be appropriate. Ed?
That's okay, I'll talk to Garen later.
Thank you.
My name is Tony Tweedale. My address is on the sign-up sheet. I'm glad I'm going after Garen, and I did sign up as a neutral, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to expound on that. And I got to say that I did watch Garen in operation when the Missoula Aquifer Ordinance was being hammered out. I attended all the subcommittee meetings, or almost all of them, and I can definitely vouch for his energy and his creative solutions, as well as his knowledge, his scientific knowledge. I think this board meeting is half a step for the board. You're here in Missoula, Mr. Hutchinson, but the board is not here, and I think we need to work on that. On the conflict of interest issue, I need to thank Ross Best very much, who did some of the heavy lifting on a lot of some of the research and nailed down for me the legal theory of why this is such an outrageous conflict. And I would address the board that I'm glad to hear that the examiner is asking for documentation of comments tonight. However, I've heard these requests before, and I'm not confident that the new board, with the 3 new members and some slightly older new members, will read these materials. I would just urge that these materials that you've asked to be submitted, I would ask that you urge the board to read those. Back to the data on the recovery boilers. The number 4 boiler is the largest boiler. It burns the most black liquor by far. I'm very impressed by the CEM data, the continual emissions monitor data. And it shows, I think, that this is not the issue to focus on. There are some other serious health problems at Stone. I have to say that the graphs Garen showed only show 3 days of data. We desperately need to see more data on the number 4 boiler. The graph showed visually a lot of variability in the number 4 boiler. The other 2 boilers, which have newer air pollution control equipment, had almost no variability, and I think that indicates that over a wider span than 3 days, you could see some substantially higher emissions of particulate. And I say this because I've heard authoritatively that this boiler, the number 4 boiler, can go for months with low emissions of particulate, and then all of a sudden have a continual series of upsets. And I understand this is related to the ancient precipitator that it's equipped with. So that this is to say, if Garen's plan succeeds, let's focus for one thing on the precipitator. As a side comment, I guess I have to say that Stone Corporation has reported more losses. We need to be realistic and realize that they're only going to have so many dollars to invest in new equipment. But I don't think that's an insurmountable problem. And finally, on the boiler, I've also heard authoritatively that the continual emissions monitor is not the only information needed to operate this boiler for low emissions. So we need to look at not just CEM data for more than 3 days, but feed rates, airflow rates, and I'd encourage Stone to provide those if we can work out an agreement with Stone. In summary, though, I have to emphasize that overall I'm impressed that the number 4 boiler can be operated at 9 to 13% opacity for days on end, and I think that indicates a lot of potential. So I strongly support any action, whether it's regulatory or not, that will ensure that the emissions from that boiler stay low. And I again say, look at the precipitator. Now I want to move on to health effects of particulate. This is a 1992 conference that was held by HHS called Particle Clearance by Alveolar Macrophages in July 1992. And I'm just going to read some brief citations from 2 articles. But let me preface that by saying that I understand from what I've read, and Jim Carlson just confirmed this for me, that emissions from recovery boilers tend to be inorganic particles less than 1 micron in size. It's well known that these, forget PM10, you need to focus on PM1 and smaller. It's well known that they're small enough to be inhaled all the way down the bronchial tree into the terminal alveoli, and you'll see why that's especially relevant. The macrophages are the white blood cells in the body that engulf foreign particles and help the body excrete foreign particles. And one of the problems with very small particulate, like what is being emitted by the number 4 boiler in such large amounts, when 200 pounds a day, when it's at 20% opacity. One of the problems is, and I'll quote here from one of the articles from this symposium, alveolar macrophages, that is the macrophages that reside inside the terminal alveoli, where the oxygen transfers from the air to the blood. Alveolar macrophages may also ingest dead epithelial cells, red blood cells, and perhaps even some of the worn out lung surfactants. I'm sorry, that's the wrong paragraph. During the last several decades, a mountain of evidence indicates that macrophages have roles that extend far beyond phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is the engulfing of the foreign particle. They are secretory and regulatory cells. They can initiate and prolong inflammatory response. They can stimulate the synthesis of extracellular matrix proteins. Thus, macrophages both respond to their microenvironment and control the activities of other cells such as neutrophils, lymphocytes, and fibroblasts. Macrophages can secrete such diverse substances as lysosomal enzymes, interferon, components of complement, angiogenesis factor, plasminogen activator, cyclic nucleotides, leukotrienes, prostaglandins, inflammatory cytokinins, and granulopoietins. Still other macrophage products may interact with complex systems such as those controlling clotting, fibrogenesis, fibrinolysis, as well as those regulated kinin and complement fragment generation. This is all to say that when small particles interact with the macrophage system, the body becomes inflamed, there's an inflammatory response, and when the inflammatory response occurs, all sorts of cascading reactions occur in the immune system, even in the central nervous system. To prove this, Lancet, in a recent article in January 25th, reported a very interesting hypothesis of how particulate causes so much morbidity and mortality. And one of the interesting things was that there's always been this association between particulate exposure and heart disease, that is to say stroke and heart attack. And what I just read you, whether you recognize it or not, indicates a very strong hypothesis that the particles cause an inflammatory response. Some of the chemicals that are secreted by the macrophages upon the inflammatory response coagulate the blood, thicken the blood, and this can lead, according to the Lancet article, to heart attack and stroke. And so there's this observed relationship already between particulate exposure and stroke. So let me emphasize in closing here on this subject that the small particulate are the most dangerous. The particulate coming out of this boiler are just the right size, 1 micron and below, and there's quite a lot of them. I'm just going to quote from one more article from the same conference, fairly briefly. The title of this article is Role of the Alveolar Macrophage in Lung Injury, Studies with Ultrafine Particles. So this article is getting at the relationship between the size of the particle and injury to the lung. Titanium dioxide and gallium oxide, Ga2O3, have both been found to be of low toxicity at a certain particle size, but when ground up into particle size approaching a fifth, a quarter of a micron, they cause all sorts of health effects. This is in lab animals, of course. We formulated the following hypothesis. A, ultrafine particles enter the interstitium more readily than larger sized particles of the same composition and therefore caused increased pulmonary toxicity. B, phagocytosis of such ultrafine particles by alveolar macrophage prevents the interstitialization of these particles and their effects. C, increasing doses of ultrafine particles administered to the lung will lead to overload situation and thereby elicit even greater effects due to a larger interstitialized fraction. In essence, they're saying that these particles are too small to be macrophaged. They transfer out of the alveolar to the other side of the alveolar wall into the space between the alveoles, and this causes a whole different range of health effects, and I think I'll just leave it at that. So not only do the macrophages themselves, in trying to get rid of the foreign substance, cause a cascade of health problems, but the very small particles that are too small to be macrophaged, and the Lancet article mentions this as well, cause a whole different set of problems by transferring out of the alveoli. I want to move on finally to the waste fuel boiler. You've heard many people tonight refer to this problem. I wish the Missoula Health Department had warned us about this several years ago when they knew about it. In my opinion, and we don't have data on this yet, this is a far larger problem than the recovery boiler, and I would like to work with Garin and Stone Container if perhaps just on this subtopic, perhaps as part of any larger agreement on the waste fuel boiler problem. The problem is caused by a very simple root to the problem. They're feeding polyvinyl chloride plastic from the old corrugated cardboard plant into the waste fuel boiler to, I guess, to save money on landfill costs and on fuel. The money that's being saved there in no way can be worth the problems that are being caused by burning so much chlorine. We don't know how much chlorine yet, but it's a lot, even if we use what the permit estimated. And when you burn chlorine in the presence of wood bark, et cetera, organic matter, you form organochlorines, and you've heard some of their health effects tonight. This is the last quote, the last set of quotes, and I'll be done. I know some people have talked about the health effects of organochlorines. I'm going to try to give a little bit more of a comprehensive overview very briefly. This is from an environmental science and technology
Tony, I think
article.
Those types of chlorines are beyond the subject matter of the particular rule we're dealing with. If you want to submit that article for the record, as well as the Lancet article, I think board members would be interested in that. But
let me dispute you for a minute. You let other people go over these health effects, and I'm trying to take a slightly different tack, and I promise I'll be done in 60 seconds.
go ahead.
Thank you. Environmental Science and Technology article recently that reported on EPA's risk assessment of dioxins and like compounds. The scientific community has identified and described a series of common biological steps that are necessary for most, if not all, of the observed effects of dioxin and related compounds in vertebrates, including humans. I'll skip a bit. A wide variety of developmental events crossing 3 vertebrate classes and several species within each class are observed. With respect to male and female reproductive endpoints, there are clear effects. Moving on to exposure, high-end estimates of body burdens of individuals in the general population, approximately the top 10% of the general population may be greater than 3 times higher than the average population. The margin of exposure between background levels and levels where effects are detectable in humans is considerably smaller than previously estimated. Since exposures within the general population are thought to be, I'll skip that. They're saying there that existing exposures to dioxins in the Missoula airshed, for example, are already in the range where these tremendous range of health effects are being observed. We're already getting enough dioxins and similar compounds. We don't need what's coming out of the waste fuel boiler stack. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
That concludes the people who have indicated they wish to testify at this hearing. I will then close the testimony portion of this hearing, and oral testimony is concluded. The people I asked to submit the data or articles in support of their testimony will be given 3 days to do so. I will prepare a written report of this hearing and a summary of the comments, both written and oral, that have been received in the record. That report will be forwarded to the Board of Health, and the board will deliberate on these proposed rule amendments at its regularly scheduled meeting on May 19th, 1995 in Helena. Thank you all for your attendance and patience.